Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing cards that go from board game to card art. I'm using the new Checkmate collection from Spellbinders. We have the Chess and Checkers die set, the Harlequin stencil set, as well as the Harlequin embossing folder. And obviously the stencil set as well as the embossing folder could be used with other collections as well. Now, because this collection doesn't have any sentiments to it, I'm using some sentiments from the Shuffling Sentiments press plate and die set. Now, most of those sentiments are geared toward card games, but I chose a few that would work for other things as well. So we have one that says "Let the games begin," one that says "Lucky you," and then one that says "Happy birthday." So especially the games one totally suits this. The "Lucky you" and "Happy birthday" are a little bit more generic, but I wanted to use all sentiments from the same set, and I didn't really want to have "Let the games begin" as a sentiment for all three cards, although you certainly could. So I'm using those press plates in my BetterPress system. I'm heat embossing those sentiments with black embossing powder. I really love BetterPress sentiments heat emboss because I love the extra dimension as well as the shine that you get from that embossing powder. But if you don't want that extra little bit of texture, you could easily just use black ink with your BetterPress system with whatever cardstock you want. The BetterPress system is very, very versatile. You can use many different types of inks and many different types of cardstocks. I'm just using some white Hammermill Cardstock here so I can customize the color of my sentiment strip for each one of the cards, but you could certainly customize it and do it on colored cardstock as well. So I'm using the coordinating die set with two of the sentiments to create that banner that this particular press plate and die set creates. I'm taping those dies in place with some Best Ever craft tape just so that that die stays exactly where I want it to while I'm doing my die cutting. And I'm die cutting it in my Platinum 6 machine, assembling those sentiments so that they're ready to go when I'm creating my cards, and using some Barely Art glue and a fine tip bottle to do that so that I can move and shimmy those pieces in place and make sure that I have perfect placement. Now I'm going to do two of those, like I said, as the banner. The third one, the Lucky You, I'm just going to use my trimmer to trim it and just create a sentiment strip that way. The sentiment is a lot smaller than the other two, so I think it would get lost and be a little bit too small for that banner. However, you could do partial die cutting or die cut with the center banner bit and then shorten it if you wanted to. I just wanted to keep the sentiment simple for this particular card, as well as have it a little bit different than the other two cards. So I just used my guillotine trimmer to trim that down. I'm going to start by creating two different chess cards, and I'm using some non-traditional colors here because I wanted to show that you can use whatever colors you want. I know chess sets come in many, many different colors, many different, color palettes. So full disclosure, I personally am not a games person because of stuff in childhood. I don't like playing games. So it's been many, many years since I've played chess. So there's a very good chance when I go to do it on my second card, when I'm placing it on a board, that I might place them in places that wouldn't make sense. And I'm totally fine with that. So if that is the case and you notice that, just know that I'm not a games person. It's been probably about 30 years since I've been anywhere near a chessboard. So these pieces are really easy to put together. The teal colored ones I've die cut out of some blue spruce, waterfall, as well as teal topaz cardstock. I just kind of followed the appearance of the pieces on the front of the die set to choose which pieces to do out of the lighter and which pieces to do out of the darker cardstock. The coral one in the middle I have die cut out of some Dahlia Cardstock, wild berry, as well as blush cardstock, but obviously you can change it up to whatever colors you want to use. For the first card, I'm going to use that Harlequin embossing folder. I'm putting the paper in there at a 90-degree angle from what I typically would, simply because I want to have more of a diamond pattern on the background. If you put it the other way, you get more of a chess or checkers. Like if you're looking at a chess or checkers board, you get more of that look. And I want to do that on the last two cards, but I wanted to just turn it around and have a very simple diamond pattern on that background. So for my mat, I'm using some teal topaz cardstock, and I have that trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. You can see right here, this is the piece that I die cut a bunch of my pieces out. I do this very often to extend my cardstock. No one is going to know that pieces were die cut out of it once you put the upper piece on there as well as your die cuts. You're never going to be able to see that. So I just like to extend my cardstock a little bit. My emboss piece was trimmed down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. And then I'm just going to glue my chest pieces here in a bit of a cluster towards the left-hand side, having one of them knocked over just for something just a little bit different. For this one, I'm going to use that Lucky You sentiment, but if I just put it with that white cardstock on that white background, it's going to kind of get a little bit lost. So I'm going to frame it with some of that Teal Topaz cardstock. I have a little scrap here. Then I'm just going to glue my sentiment to the bottom corner, and then I'm going to use my guillotine trimmer in order to trim that down to create an even border all around. And I use the finger guard, the edge of the finger guard, as my guide there. I'll line up my sentiment with that finger guard and then trim it. And if by chance the very first time I don't get enough off, then I'll just move it over a little bit. Obviously, smaller sentiments are a little bit more challenging than larger pieces, but it does work. Another option here would be to measure that Lucky You sentiment, and then from that measurement, die or trim it down something that's just a little bit bigger if you find that easier for you, and then you can add the Lucky You to it afterwards. So here's the first card, and you can see it was super quick to finish. Now we're going to create another one with some more chest pieces. For this one, I'm going to create a bit of a chessboard behind it and use that layering stencil set. So once again, I'm assembling these pieces. You can see that I lay them out in order of how they get put together. I find this the easiest way to do it. It keeps everything nice and organized. I can make sure that I have all of the pieces ready to go, and it makes it so easy for assembly. Because I have everything in order and I know exactly which piece should go next. I can just see it while I'm doing it. So if you have a die cut piece, not necessarily these chest and checker pieces, but you have something that has a lot of pieces to it, it can be a little bit overwhelming. By laying them out like this, it takes that overwhelm out of it. So it makes it a little bit more visually organized, and that way you know where all of the pieces are, you know you have them all, and you can put them together one piece at a time. And I do find having liquid glue definitely helps, because you can move and shimmy that die cut in place as you're assembling them. That glue starts to set fairly quickly, so you don't have to wait a long time for it to set. And often I'll put an acrylic block over top of my pieces just to hold them down nice and flat and free my hands up for working with other things. So this layered stencil set has 4 different layers to create the Harlequin background, and then it has a 5th layer to create shadow areas for those chest pieces. So for my background here, I'm going to use some black soot distress ink for the first 2 layers to create the black squares for my checkerboard. I'm using my sticky mat here to hold the stencil in place, and I'm also using a large Spellbinders brush to fill in all of the areas of that stencil. Now I'm using distress ink, so when it comes to cleaning my stencils, all it takes is running it under a tap. I don't need any special cleaner, so it makes that cleanup super easy. For my next layer, I'm once again using that black soot distress ink. When I do stenciling, I've talked about this before, I will regularly make some areas lighter than others. For this one, for the black areas, I'm kind of trying to keep them close-ish in color. I want it to look like a black and colored checkerboard. For the 3rd layer, I'm going to use some evergreen bow distress ink to be a close color to my tealy colored chest pieces. I'm going to do one of these layers a little bit darker than others, and you can see when I do it that I have some areas that are darker and some areas that are lighter. Personally, I like doing it this way because I think it is a little bit more visually interesting, but you can certainly do an even color distribution if you prefer. I'm also going to use that same color on one of those banner sentiment pieces so that I can put that on front and it coordinates perfectly with the colors that I'm using. I have the 4th stencil here, once again using that evergreen bow, and again going to do some areas that are a little bit lighter, some areas that are a little bit darker, just to be a little bit more interesting. When it comes to things like this, I think it just looks more visually interesting if everything is not exactly the same shade. If I wanted it the same shade, I probably would pick some printed paper up and save the time. But the great thing about using stencils is you can customize those colors. So I'm going to use the shadow piece for the chest pieces that I have created and I have assembled. All of the different chess piece shadows are there. So I'm just going to match them up to the ones that I have die cut for this particular card. This is a great way just to add a little bit of extra detail. I'm using some hickory smoke distress ink for the shadow pieces. Obviously, because some of those squares are black, you're not going to see the hickory smoke distress ink on all of them. You're going to see it on some of them. But I thought it just added an extra detail to it that was interesting and made it look a little bit more lifelike. Now, while I have this piece on my sticky mat, I'm just going to glue my chess pieces on there and let them sit for a few moments to dry. And this is where I was talking that if I have pieces in an area where they're not supposed to be, it's quite possible. I really don't know. I'm choosing them more for which colors are going on which color square, as well as kind of trying to have an even distribution of the different colors around. Although I do realize after the fact that I put two of the coral pieces to the center right side and I didn't have anything on the left side. That's totally fine. For the card assembly, I have my mat here done with some Dahlia Cardstock, Wildberry Cardstock. I have that trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. My stencil piece I trimmed down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches. And I took a 1/4 inch from the top and the bottom, and then a 1/2 inch from the left side because I have that pawn piece close to the right side. I didn't want to cut that off. Finally, I'm adding my sentiment just to an open area towards the bottom. I really love the look that that shadow stencil gives to it. And I think if you have your chess pieces a little bit farther apart, you would definitely see a lot more of that shadow. You would also see them, obviously, if some of your squares were not the black. Now, for the last card, I want to use the checkers parts. So I have some checker pieces die cut with cranberry and pomegranate cardstock for the red pieces. For the black pieces, I have them die cut out of Raven cardstock as well as Anchor cardstock. And we definitely want 2 different tones so that we can see the different details to them. They're really, really easy to put together. We have our base piece here with that center oval. Then we have the piece that fills in that center oval, and that's the part that I've die cut out of that Anchor cardstock. So then we can see that upper oval piece on it, as well as either the crown or the oval piece on the top of the piece there. So I have several different pieces pre-assembled off screen. I just did one of each one on screen, and now we're going to create the background. So I want to do a combination of using that embossing folder with that stencil set for this background. I love when you have coordinating embossing and layering stencil sets. You can use them just with the embossing folder, just with the layering stencils, or you can combine the 2 together. So for this one, I want to combine the 2 together. So I've done my background. I tried to center that pattern in my piece here so that it kind of just looks a little bit centered, looks even. Then I'm going to use my stencil set to stencil in the color on the raised areas. So you could do all 4 layer stencils if you want, but for this I just chose to only do the 2 stencils, so it ends up being stencil 3 and stencil 4 for the raised areas of my background. I'm going to use some Lumberjack Plaid Distress ink. I didn't want it to be so dark with all of the black because we still have some black pieces on there, so I wanted to keep it lighter. So for this, my background is just going to be that Lumberjack Plaid with the white cardstock, just for something a little bit lighter, but you could certainly use those first 2 stencils for the other pieces if you wanted to add black to it as well. Then I'm using it with the 4th stencil for the other areas of the raised Harlequin here. And again, just like my last stenciled background, you can see that some areas are darker, some areas that are lighter. It looks just more like a worn, used chess or checkers board that way. For this one, I'm using some black cardstock for my mat, so I've trimmed that down to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. My stencil piece here is being trimmed down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches, so it's about a 1/4 inch off of each side, and I do like to trim it down after I've done my embossing and my stenciling. That way, if I have an area that I really like, I can focus on that and I can adjust my trimming to that. For my stencil, I'm using that Lumberjack Plaid Distress ink on that stencil or on that sentiment banner. And I put that to the side before we start to assemble. So once again, the assemble is super easy. These cards are really quite easy. It probably took longer to do my die cutting than it did to assemble and stencil all the pieces for the cards, but I really love it. It's perfect for someone that loves chess or loves checkers or loves games. And I love that you can create some custom cards for this. Once again, I am putting my black pieces on red squares. I'm putting my red pieces on white squares because I didn't want red on red. And again, because I don't play checkers, I might have them in areas that just don't make sense, but I'm just kind of trying to distribute the colors around that background so that they kind of look even, look balanced. So I'm using the Barely Art glue to help glue those pieces in place, and you can see that I have some of those checker pieces just extending past my matte layers just for a more interesting look to it. I just thought it looked more interesting. However, you could put these pieces on your stenciled embossed background before assembling your card, and then you could trim them down if you don't like that look, if you wanted them just to end with the end of that piece. But I do think it looks a little bit more interesting sometimes when you have die cuts extending past your main piece or extending past your mat. Here is that first card, that checkers card, and I love those sentiments from the Shuffling Sentiments set with them. I think they work really well with it. Then we have our second chess card with that stenciled background, and that has a completely different vibe from our first chessboard. This one has a little bit more of a clean and simple look because we don't have that stenciled background. We just have that diamond background, and of course that pattern on that back was so easy to just change up by changing the orientation of the paper. You can find all the supplies that I've used listed and linked down in the description box below. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.